You ever notice how the people with the softest hearts often end up facing the hardest battles? There's a kind of quiet strength in emotionally intelligent women, an awareness, a depth, a compassion that lights up a room without trying. But sometimes that same light attracts shadows. So today, I want to talk about something real, something a lot of people live through silently. Why emotionally intelligent women often become targets for narcissists. And I'm not here to blame them. I'm here to honor them because their compassion isn't a weakness, it's a superpower. But like all power, it must be protected. Let's talk about why this happens and what can be done. You ever meet someone whose heart is so open, so aware, so genuinely tuned in to the world around them that you can almost feel their presence soften the room? Emotionally intelligent women have that gift. They listen with their whole being. They notice the subtle tremors beneath someone's words. They sense discomfort before anyone else even picks up on it. They don't just hear people, they understand them. They don't just care, they feel. And that kind of empathy, it's powerful, it's rare. And for someone who doesn't know how to love, someone who only knows how to take, that empathy becomes the perfect target. Empathy is a beacon. It's warmth in a world that often feels cold. Most people step into that warmth and feel grateful. But a narcissist sees something else, a limitless energy source, a place to drink from without giving anything back, a well that seems deep enough to never run dry. And so they come closer, carefully, quietly, sometimes even beautifully. They come with charm, with intensity, with the appearance of vulnerability. They reveal just enough brokenness to trigger the caretaker inside an empathetic woman. And at first, she thinks she's helping someone heal. She thinks she's offering comfort to a wounded soul. She thinks she's doing what she's always done, lifting others with her compassion. There's a woman I once heard speak about her experience. She said that the man she fell for seemed lost in a way that made her heart ache. He talked about childhood, wounds, betrayals, loneliness. She saw the good in him because that's what she does. She sees the potential, not just the pain. She believed that with understanding and patience he would grow. She believed he simply needed someone to finally hear him. And in the beginning, he rewarded that belief. He showered her with affection. He praised her emotional depth. He told her she was the only one who got him. To someone with empathy, that kind of connection feels profound. It feels meaningful. It feels like you're finally being met on the same wavelength. But narcissists don't admire empathy. They consume it. They study it. They learn how to use it. They turn kindness into leverage. They twist compassion into obligation. An emotionally intelligent woman will sit in silence with someone while they unravel their story. She'll ask gentle questions. She'll listen without judgment. She won't rush them. She won't shame them. And a narcissist sees all of this and realizes something unsettling. She will give more than she takes. She will understand more than she demands. She will forgive more than she should. And once they know that, the dynamic shifts. Where empathy sees a hurting person worth helping, a narcissist sees a resource, someone who will excuse bad behavior because they believe there must be a reason behind it. Someone who will stay in the relationship longer than she should because she's searching for the wounded child behind the cruel adult. Someone who will rationalize the emotional withdrawal, the coldness, the manipulation because she thinks he's acting this way because he feels unsafe. Maybe if I create more safety, he'll soften. But here's the heartbreaking truth. You cannot heal someone whose identity depends on never being wrong. You cannot fill someone who has built their world on taking. You cannot love someone into becoming whole when their emptiness is intentional, protected, weaponized. Empathetic women often believe in emotional responsibility. They believe that everyone carries wounds. They believe that listening and caring and understanding can make the world better. And in so many cases, they're right. But with a narcissist, empathy becomes the very thing that keeps them trapped. There's science behind it too. Research shows that people with high empathy respond more intensely to expressions of pain or distress, even when those expressions are exaggerated or manipulative. Their brains literally light up with concern. So when a narcissist says, "You don't understand what I've been through," or "everyone else has abandoned me," it hits the empathetic person like a call to action. This is how a cycle begins. She comforts, he takes, she forgives, he demands more. She explains rationally, he twists her words. She worries about hurting him, he never worries about hurting her. You might think someone emotionally intelligent would see the manipulation early, but ironically, it's their empathy that blinds them. They look for the best in others. They see emotional patterns and try to interpret behaviors through compassion. They give the benefit of the doubt because they understand how complex people can be. They assume that if someone hurts them, it must come from pain, not cruelty. And in most relationships, that assumption would help build bridges. But with a narcissist, it becomes a trap. One woman once described it perfectly. "I wasn't loving him. I was trying to rescue the broken pieces of someone he pretended to be." And that's the painful twist. Narcissists can imitate vulnerability. They can mimic emotions. They can perform sincerity with shocking accuracy, but none of it sustains, none of it repeats, none of it grows. Meanwhile, the empathetic woman keeps giving because giving is natural to her. Supporting feels instinctive. Caring feels right. She assumes that the love she offers will eventually be reciprocated. She assumes that emotional investment is mutual, but it never is. Not with someone who views love as a transaction and empathy as fuel. And slowly, she feels herself changing. She feels her energy thinning. She feels her confidence dimming. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she gave compassion to someone who saw it as weakness. She loved someone who saw love as something to extract, not share. Here's the quiet, powerful truth woven through all of this. Her empathy was never the problem. Her kindness was never the flaw. Her emotional intelligence wasn't what made her vulnerable. It's what made her valuable. She wasn't targeted because she was weak. She was targeted because she was strong in ways a narcissist could never be. Empathy is a gift. Compassion is a gift. Emotional awareness is a gift. But like all gifts, it must be protected from those who only know how to take. And when an emotionally intelligent woman learns to redirect that empathy toward herself, when she recognizes her worth, her boundaries, her inner strength, she becomes untouchable, unreachable by those who thrive in emotional chaos, too grounded, too aware, too self-loving to fall for someone who feeds on the light of others. Her empathy becomes not a target, but a shield. There's something remarkable about people who look at another human being and see more than what's right in front of them. Some people see flaws, mistakes, inconsistencies, but emotionally intelligent women, they see potential, they see layers, they see the quiet good hiding beneath the noise. They see the person someone could grow into, not just the one who stands there now. And it's beautiful, really. It's hopeful. It's generous in a way the world desperately needs. But that same gift can pull them into situations where their vision becomes a kind of trap. Because when they meet someone who carries emotional contradictions, someone charming one minute and distant the next, someone intense at the beginning but unpredictable later, they don't immediately judge. They assume complexity. They assume there's a story behind the behavior, a wound behind the inconsistency. And when the person is a narcissist, that assumption becomes the doorway in. A narcissist thrives on presenting possibility. It's their favorite mask. They walk into someone's life wearing the costume of who they could be. They talk about big dreams, about overcoming struggles, about wanting something real, something meaningful. They mirror desires, they mimic values, they pretend to want depth because they know what kind of person they're standing in front of. And emotionally intelligent women feel that spark. They sense potential like a pulse running through someone's words. They focus on the pieces that look honest, vulnerable, human. They ignore the red flags because they believe in transformation, because they know that real, lasting change takes time, patience, and compassion. They've seen it before, they've done it themselves. They know people grow when they're loved well. But a narcissist doesn't grow, they mutate. They shift their presentation based on what keeps them adored, admired, or needed. They give you glimpses of the person you want them to be, just enough to keep your hope alive, just enough to make you think, if I stay, if I believe in them, this potential will eventually become real. I once heard someone say she stayed in a relationship far longer than she should have because she wasn't in love with the person standing in front of her. She was in love with the version of him she imagined. She said it was like holding on to a photograph of a future that never arrived. She kept waiting for him to step into the man she saw inside him, but he never took a single step. Emotionally intelligent women often mistake potential for progress. They see the first week of effort and assume it will lead to a lifetime of change. They hear a moment of vulnerability and believe it represents deep emotional truth. They watch small improvements and interpret them as signs of commitment. But narcissists don't commit to becoming better. They commit to maintaining control. And one of the easiest ways to control someone who sees potential is to feed them just enough hope to keep them trying, to keep them healing, to keep them investing. The relationship becomes a cycle. He promises change. She forgives. He performs change. She feels relieved. He drops the act. She thinks he's struggling. He just needs more support. And the cycle continues. Her brilliance becomes her burden. Her emotional insight becomes a lens that filters out the ugliness and magnifies the possibility. She gives chance after chance, not because she's naive, but because she's loyal to the best version of someone, even if that version only exists in her imagination. Emotionally intelligent people often understand the psychology behind behavior. They know trauma creates patterns. They know insecurity creates defensiveness. They know fear creates withdrawal. So when a narcissist lashes out, they look for the wound instead of the intention. When a narcissist withdraws affection, they assume it's emotional overwhelm. When a narcissist lies, they interpret it as fear of vulnerability. They rewrite the narrative in a way that protects the other person because they want it to make sense. They want the story to be coherent. They want the person they care about to just take that final step into the potential they glimpsed early on. And narcissists depend on that. They rely on the other person's ability to reinterpret pain as complexity. They rely on someone seeing the good in them so clearly that they overlook the harm. They rely on being judged by their potential instead of their behavior. There's another truth that hurts, but it's important. When you focus on what someone could be, you stop seeing what they are, and what they are is revealed in their patterns, not their promises. Emotionally intelligent women often feel responsible for other people's growth. They think, if I just love them the right way, if I communicate clearly, if I stay patient, they'll eventually meet me halfway. It's a story rooted in hope, a story rooted in compassion, a story rooted in the belief that every person has a better self waiting to emerge. But you cannot build a future with someone who only shows up in potential form. You cannot build a relationship on possibilities. You cannot hold on to someone's shadow and call it love. There's a story of a woman who kept a journal during her relationship with a narcissist. She wrote a list of all the qualities he had inside him: kindness, empathy, responsibility, partnership. Later, after the relationship ended, she looked back at the list and realized something heartbreaking. Not one item described how he actually behaved. Every word described the version of him she was waiting for, the man he pretended to be long enough for her to believe in him. She said it felt like grieving a person who never existed, and that's the emotional trap. When you fall in love with someone's potential, you don't just lose them, you lose the future you thought you were building. You lose the hope you carried. You lose the meaning you projected onto them. But here's the thing. Seeing potential is still a gift. It's a reflection of your own depth, your ability to love beyond flaws, your willingness to see the whole human experience, your faith in transformation. The real power comes when you learn to separate potential from reality, when you start listening to behavior more than words, when you start valuing patterns over possibilities, when you start giving your compassion to people who earn it, not just the ones who inspire it. Because when an emotionally intelligent woman finally shifts her gaze from what someone could be to what they choose to be, everything changes. She becomes unstoppable. She becomes clear. She becomes impossible to manipulate. And ironically, that's when she finally attracts someone whose potential and behavior match. Someone whose actions meet her heart where it stands. Someone who builds a future with her, not just a fantasy for her. Seeing potential is never the problem. Trusting behavior is the solution. There's a certain kind of person who walks through the world with a quiet sense of purpose. They don't announce it. They don't show it off. It's something woven into the way they listen, the way they care, the way they understand others with this deep, instinctive compassion. Emotionally intelligent women often fall into this group. They're the ones who sit beside someone who's hurting and just know what to say, or know when not to say anything at all. They're the ones people turn to when life becomes too heavy, when emotions get tangled, when the world feels like it's closing in. They carry a light inside them that makes others feel safe enough to unravel. They have this natural healer energy. They don't try to fix people. They just make people feel seen, heard, and valued. And that is powerful. But that same power, that same healing presence becomes a magnet for people who don't want to change, but desperately want the comfort that comes from being around someone who can soothe wounds they refuse to address. That dynamic is exactly where narcissists slip in. Not because they want to grow, not because they want to heal, but because they want someone who will do the emotional heavy lifting for them while they stay exactly the same. A narcissist doesn't come to a healer for transformation. They come to feel affirmed, admired, validated, and emotionally intelligent women, with their patience and their ability to understand emotional nuance, become the perfect source of that validation. They offer empathy even before it's asked for. They try to understand people's emotional patterns, their fears, their childhood wounds. They see that behind harsh words or cold behavior, there might be pain. They want to help. It's part of who they are. And narcissists know this. They pick up on it the way a starving man notices a full table. They sense someone who is able to hold space for them, someone who will listen to their stories, real or exaggerated, about how misunderstood they are. They lean into that kindness. They reveal just enough vulnerability to hook the healer instinct inside her. They talk about their broken past, their disappointments, their betrayals. They talk about how no one has ever cared for them the way she does. They might even cry, and in those moments she sees the wounded child instead of the manipulative adult. But the tears don't signal healing, they signal opportunity. For them, being vulnerable is a strategy, not a step toward growth. There's a story I remember hearing from a woman who said that her partner would break down crying whenever she confronted him about hurting her. The conversation would flip instantly. She'd start comforting him instead of holding him accountable. And after each emotional episode, he'd promise change. He'd promise awareness. He'd promise effort, but nothing ever shifted. The apologies came like raindrops, frequent, emotional, dramatic. but the behavior never followed. She kept leaning in because she believed those emotional outbursts meant he wanted to heal. She thought love could be the bridge that carried him toward emotional maturity. But in time, she realized he didn't want to be healed. He wanted to be rescued. And there's a huge difference. Healers want to lift others up. Narcissists want to be lifted without walking. Emotionally intelligent women often carry a belief that love can transform anyone. And in healthy relationships, that's often true. Listening, understanding, nurturing, these things create growth. But with a narcissist, every ounce of healing energy gets poured into a hole with no bottom. It doesn't matter how much compassion she gives, how much patience she practices, or how many chances she extends. Nothing sticks. Because genuine healing requires self-awareness, honesty, and accountability. Things narcissists avoid like a shadow fleeing the sun. They want the benefits of healing without the discomfort of growth. So the dynamic becomes exhausting. She listens, she supports, she offers insight, she forgives, she explains, she gives tools, strategies, emotional safety. She sees emotional patterns and tries to help him untangle them. But he treats her compassion like a service, something he deserves, something he's entitled to, something she owes him simply because he exists in her life. And each time she tries to guide him toward responsibility, toward seeing his own role in the hurt he causes, he recoils, he shifts the blame, he turns the focus back on her. He accuses her of being insensitive or demanding or misunderstanding him. Suddenly, she becomes the villain in a story she entered as a healer. She becomes the one who doesn't get it, even though she's the one doing all the emotional work. Narcissists fear actual healing because healing would require them to confront the truth about themselves. And the truth is something they run from fiercely and endlessly. What they crave instead is relief, a temporary soothing of the ego, a temporary bandage for the insecurity they hide behind their grandiosity. And emotionally intelligent women, with their tenderness and their instinct to mend, provide exactly that relief. But here's where the emotional trap tightens. She starts believing that if she can just love him better, support him more consistently, communicate more clearly, he'll eventually become accountable. She believes her love can be the missing piece that unlocks his transformation. She sees what he could be if he just stepped into honesty, if he just let himself grow, if he just opened up in a genuine way. But narcissists don't open. They imitate opening. They simulate healing. They perform the emotions that will secure the supply they want. Meanwhile, the healer inside her becomes tired, not immediately, not loudly, but drop by drop. She starts to feel emotionally drained, confused, unsteady. She begins questioning herself, wondering why her support suddenly feels like a burden, wondering why her intuition has become clouded, wondering why she feels more like a caretaker than a partner. The truth is painful but necessary. You cannot heal someone who uses your compassion as a crutch to avoid change. You cannot fix someone who benefits from staying broken. You cannot pour your empathy into someone who only opens their hands to receive, never to give. And when emotionally intelligent women finally see this, truly see this, something powerful happens. There's this quiet, awakening moment where the fog lifts, where they recognize that real healing can only happen when both people want to grow, when both people show up, when both people take responsibility. They realize that their heart was never the problem. Their compassion wasn't the flaw. Their emotional intelligence wasn't the weakness. The problem was giving those beautiful qualities to someone who only knew how to take from them. And in that moment of clarity, they reclaim their power. Their empathy becomes something they finally direct toward themselves. Their desire to heal becomes something they offer to people who appreciate it, not exploit it. Their emotional awareness becomes a shield instead of a vulnerability, Because the moment a natural healer realizes she deserves someone who actively participates in the healing of the relationship, someone who grows alongside her, not at her expense, she becomes unstoppable. She stops attracting brokenness. She stops tolerating emotional manipulation. She stops believing that it's her job to fix what someone else refuses to acknowledge. She becomes a force of quiet strength. A person who heals not by sacrificing herself, but by choosing relationships that honor her soul. And that choice, that shift, that inner awakening is the moment she steps out of the orbit of people who never intended to grow and into the life she was always meant to live. There's a certain peace some people carry within them, a calmness that isn't loud or showy, but steady. Like a quiet lake that reflects everything around it without judgment. Emotionally intelligent women often walk through the world with this kind of calm. They don't crave chaos. They don't seek out drama. They prefer harmony, understanding, connection. And when conflict shows up, they don't rush into it with fists clenched or voices raised. Instead, they try to soften it, ease it, understand it. They try to make room for compassion even when the moment feels tense. That kind of heart, that desire for harmony is beautiful, but in the presence of a narcissist, it becomes the very thing that gets exploited. Narcissists don't view conflict the way healthy people do. Where emotionally intelligent women avoid it to preserve peace, narcissists avoid accountability. Where she chooses calm because she values emotional safety, they avoid confrontation because it threatens their illusion of superiority. And so the moment they realize she doesn't like conflict, they see an opening, a crack in the wall where they can slip closer, push harder, take more. It starts small, always small. A subtle comment that feels a little dismissive, a joke that cuts a little too close to the bone, a promise broken, then brushed aside with a charm-filled smile. And she thinks, it's not worth the fight. She chooses grace over argument. She chooses understanding over accusation. She chooses to let it go because she believes in choosing battles wisely. But what she doesn't see, what no one sees at first, is that narcissists study reactions. They take mental notes. They learn from silence. If she doesn't speak up the first time, they push a little further. If she lets a hurtful comment slide, they sharpen the next one. If she cushions her own discomfort to avoid tension, they pick up on the pattern. And their internal conclusion becomes, I can get away with this. Conflict avoidance becomes permission in their eyes. Not because she intended it that way, but because narcissists interpret kindness as weakness and gentleness as an open door. They don't understand the emotional maturity behind calm communication. They only recognize opportunities to expand their control. There's a story I once heard from a woman who described her relationship like this. He would say something cruel, and I'd tell myself he didn't mean it. He was tired, stressed, distracted. I wanted to be the bigger person. I wanted to be patient. And every time I swallowed my hurt, he learned he could hurt me more. That's how the boundary erosion begins, not with explosions, but with tiny, quiet moments where she chooses peace over confrontation. She chooses the relationship over her own discomfort. She chooses hope over the truth unfolding in front of her. Emotionally intelligent women are often incredible communicators. They think deeply before they speak. They weigh the impact of their words, and they want everyone to leave a conversation feeling understood. But narcissists twist this strength into a disadvantage. They weaponize her calm against her. When she finally tries to address something small, something gentle, they meet her with defensiveness or anger or a dramatic display that turns her concern into an attack. Suddenly, the conversation becomes about how sensitive she is, how misunderstanding she is, how she's creating tension out of nothing. And because she hates conflict, she backs down again. The cycle tightens. Little by little, her comfort zone shrinks, while the narcissist expands. She starts second-guessing herself. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I should let this go. Maybe it's not worth a discussion. But something deep inside her begins to feel off. She starts carrying tension in her shoulders, unease in her chest, worry in her mind. She starts editing herself, choosing words carefully, monitoring her reactions, tiptoeing through conversations like she's walking across a frozen lake, afraid the ice will crack beneath her. That isn't peace. That's emotional survival. People like her avoid conflict because they want relationships to thrive, not because they're afraid. But narcissists don't see the difference. They don't understand that her avoidance comes from love, not fear. They only see an opportunity to push limits without consequences. They escalate slowly. A boundary crossed here, a disrespect brushed off there, a moment of emotional neglect turned into a pattern, a promise broken with no apology, and each time she stays gentle, stays calm, stays understanding, they push harder, they normalize their behavior, while slowly training her to tolerate it. One day she looks back and realizes she's living in a landscape of broken boundaries, boundaries she never wanted to give up but surrendered in the name of peace. What she once accepted as occasional now feels like the rhythm of the relationship. What she once forgave has become expected. What she once believed was temporary now feels permanent. That realization hurts because she knows she didn't get there by being weak. She got there by being loving, by being patient, by wanting to protect the connection, by believing that when you care about someone, you talk gently, you avoid unnecessary fights, you choose compassion. But compassion without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. And self-betrayal is exactly what narcissists count on. Yet here's the powerful truth beneath all of this. The same emotional intelligence that kept her quiet is the same intelligence that can set her free. Because emotionally intelligent women eventually notice the pattern. They piece together the moments where their silence became permission. They see the shape of the relationship shifting beneath them. They feel the weight of holding peace for two while the other person holds none. And once they see it clearly, truly see it, they begin to awaken. They start to realize that avoiding conflict doesn't preserve peace, it preserves the narcissist's comfort. They see that boundaries aren't walls, they're safety. They understand that healthy relationships require honesty, not silence. And they begin reclaiming the space that was slowly taken from them. When she starts speaking up calmly, steadily, with the same emotional awareness she brings to everything, something changes. Not in the narcissist because they rarely change, but in her. She begins to trust her own voice again. She begins to feel her own strength again. She begins to understand that conflict isn't the enemy, disrespect is. And slowly she steps out of the shrinking circle the narcissist tried to keep her in. She expands, she breathes, she reclaims her dignity, her peace, her presence, because avoiding conflict never meant she didn't have power. It meant she had compassion. But when compassion meets clarity, when empathy meets self-respect, she becomes someone impossible to manipulate. Her boundaries stop being optional. Her voice stops being quiet, and her silence stops being mistaken for surrender. She learns that true peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of respect. There's something almost indescribable about the strength a deeply emotionally intelligent woman carries. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it's not the kind of strength that demands to be seen. It's quieter, steady, grounded, shaped by experience, awareness, and an ability to hold space for others in a way that makes people feel understood. And because of that, this strength can look effortless from the outside. It can seem unshakable, but that very strength, that unwavering presence, can become a beacon for someone who doesn't want to grow beside her, but wants to feel powerful by breaking something beautiful down. Narcissists are drawn to that kind of strength because deep down they know they don't have it. They know they can't build it within themselves without facing the parts of their own story they refuse to acknowledge. So instead of growing, they take a shortcut. They target the strong. They go after the women who carry themselves with grace, who care deeply, who believe in connection, who show compassion even when the world gets heavy. They look for the ones who have fought quiet battles and come out wiser. Because if they can chip away at someone like that, even just a little, it makes them feel bigger, taller, more in control. It's a painful truth, but one worth naming. I remember someone telling me a story about a woman who everyone described as the Rock. She was the kind of person people called when they were having a bad day or when life fell apart. She listened. She didn't judge. She made you feel like you weren't as alone as you thought. And then she met someone who admired that strength at first, or said they did. He told her he'd never met anyone so resilient. He said her presence calmed him. He said her confidence inspired him. And she believed him because why wouldn't she? That's what honest people do. They take words at face value. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, admiration shifted into resentment. He began to pick at small things, her tone, her decisions, the way she spent her time. He'd say, "You think you're so strong," but not in a way that celebrated her. It came out like an accusation, like a challenge, like her strength threatened him. And when she finally confronted him, he said, "You're not as tough as you think." It was meant to cut. It was meant to make her doubt the very thing that made her who she was. And for a moment, it worked. That's how it begins most of the time. A moment of doubt, a second of questioning, a crack in the foundation. Because when someone so emotionally aware is targeted, it's rarely done with outright cruelty at the beginning. It's done with subtlety, with small comments, shifting tones, comparisons, backhanded praise. It's done slowly, patiently, strategically. A narcissist doesn't want to destroy her quickly. They want to watch her unravel in a way that convinces her it's her fault. The heartbreaking part is that the women who fall into these dynamics don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they're strong. They fall because they're hopeful, because they believe people can be better than the worst parts of themselves, because they've spent their lives holding on to the idea that connection is worth the effort. And that hope, that strength, becomes the very thing someone fragile uses to feel powerful. But here's the real truth. That strength never actually disappears. It never truly breaks. It gets buried for a while under manipulation, under doubt, under exhaustion. It gets dimmed, it gets quiet. But it doesn't vanish. Because strength built through emotional intelligence isn't something someone can take away. It's something that can be reclaimed, rediscovered, reignited. And when it returns, it doesn't just come back. It comes back louder, steadier, sharper than before. Because now it's reinforced with clarity, with boundaries, with the understanding that real strength is not measured by how much you can endure, but by recognizing when someone is trying to turn your light into their shadow and refusing to let them. If you've ever found yourself tangled in a relationship like this, hear me clearly. Nothing about your intelligence, your empathy, or your capacity for love is the problem. Your heart isn't flawed. Your depth isn't a mistake. You were targeted because you shine, and that shine, when protected, can light a path out and light up the world for people who truly deserve to share it with you. Your empathy is not a weakness. Your compassion is not a liability. Your emotional intelligence is not a curse. It's your power, and now you know how to guard it.